All right. Well, I am super excited to get back at it today with you all for the Privacy Exchange Community Show and Tell show with our very special guest, Dom Vogel. Dom is a cybersecurity leader who provides actionable, pragmatic, and strategic cyber risk management for small and medium-sized organizations. In addition to that, he provides leadership coaching to professionals in privacy, cybersecurity, and related professions. And that's kind of the meat of what we're planning to talk about today. So with Dom, we'll discuss trends he's seeing, career concerns, issues across cybersecurity that have bubbled up, and leadership challenges. So we'll spend the next 25 minutes or so together. First, Dom and I will talk for between 10 to 15 minutes during our recorded session for those folks who were not able to join earlier. And then we'll turn off the recording and have about 10 minutes or so of audience Q&A. As a reminder, none of the information that Dom or I or anyone else here shares is legal advice. I don't even think Dom's a lawyer. I'm definitely not a lawyer. But if you need legal advice, talk to a lawyer, your own, for your particular legal matters. All right, Dom, are you ready to get started?
I absolutely am, Mary. I was going to say, when you do your world tour, please come to Vancouver. I'd love to see you.
Vancouver. That is definitely on the list. So, okay, first, Dom, I'd love to know a little bit more about your company. It is unique. How did it come about? What services do you provide? And I'm particularly curious about the coaching piece too.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking, Mary. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm celebrating 10 years as an entrepreneur and 21 years in cyber. And this current reimagination, I call it, my entrepreneurial career, I've centered around what I refer to as my professional buckets of joy, right? So I focus on the things that give me professional joy. That's why I'm no longer working corporate, because I was not joy there or lacking joy. But so for me, we're at my company. It's called Vogel Cyber Leadership and Coaching. And it's allowed me to focus on the things, like I said, that give me the greatest professional joy. So one is the security leadership. So you mentioned, again, that fractional CISO work that I do, again, generally with smaller organizations that are lacking internal cyber leadership, working with them in terms of security strategy, doing assessments, figuring out how do we tackle security in meaningful, practical ways. Right? My second bucket is the coaching, right? So I focus mainly with organizations that bring me in to help build up their brand, whether it's the IT brand, cyber brand, the technical brand of an organization, to really help them elevate beyond being just seen as the tech team and being seen as a valuable part of the organization, right? And I'm a big believer through that coaching and taking a very human-centric approach, right? It's unfortunate that a lot of IT people, a lot of technical people, they typically have overinvested in their technical skills, or what we sometimes refer to as hard skills, and they've underinvested in the soft skills, or what I call people/human skills, right? So that's where I go in and coach tech teams and IT teams in terms of communication, empathy, right? How to be able to develop deep and meaningful relationships. And as part of that, elevate the brand of IT, right? So I've done a lot of work, as an example, with help desks, who are often the front line of IT in a lot of organizations, and working with them in terms of how to be kinder, how to have more meaningful conversations when people call in, rather than just the being seen as very condescending and rude, right? So that coaching is my second bucket. My third bucket is my professional speaking. I'm very fortunate I get to tour around North America, either talking about cyber to boards of directors or executives, or getting to speak to technical crowds around leadership, right? I was in New Orleans a few weeks ago, headlining a B-side security conference there, and my talk was around unleashing your inner leader. And for me, I love talking about leadership, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but leadership to me is really rooted in being a good human, right? And my talk was focused around, if you want to be a great leader, focus on developing your kindness, your empathy, your vulnerability, and your authenticity. That to me is where leadership starts. So that's my very long-winded answer in terms of who I am and what I do.
That is fascinating. So you provide services to small and medium-sized businesses. You do internal team coaching and up-leveling, and then you also do speaking to large organizations. That is fascinating. And you're actually like touching on like how often do companies invest in your hard skills? They'll give you all the sorts of training and budget to do that, but you're really touching on something that I've overlooked, which is the empathy and the human or people skills, as you called it. I'm very curious about that. So, in terms of your clients, like in your bucket of joy number two, what kind of themes or trends do you see come up frequently with your clients?
Yeah, you know what? And I'll say the theme that I often come across is that there is a CIO, an IT leader that is struggling to either connect with his or her team, is struggling to feel seen by his or her executive peers, is struggling to do meaningful change in the organization. And often, reach out to me again, whether they saw me speaking at an event or through platforms like LinkedIn, where, as you know, I love spending a lot of time there and forming great friendships like this one. And they'll reach out and say, I really need help. I'm not sure how to lead either as the team, lead the function of this. We're struggling, right? And that constant theme that I see is very much like what you were saying there, in which I see teams that are technically extremely astute, right? I look at their training plans. They are armed to the teeth with all sorts of tech trainings and tech certifications, right? But when I ask often IT leaders, like, well, how are you making your best people find their truest version of themselves? How are you making your people better as people? And pretty much every single time they're like, never thought about it that way. We just thought we needed to give them more technical certifications, right? And like, I'm a big believer, and we can talk about like quantum computing and all that stuff, and you see how much technology has evolved over 20 years, right? I remember the security tools I started to use 20 years ago. I look at the tools now, they've evolved so darn much, right? But how we are as people, how we develop our people, that has flatlined, and arguably it's gone down. And so my big theme is that if we were to elevate people at that same curve that we're doing technology, think of all the amazing problems we could solve, right? So that to me is that constant theme that we're under investing in people. And if we truly want to unlock next level in terms of the technology that we have, it's not about making better technology, right? It's about harnessing that energy, and that, to me, that synergy between humanity and technology. And that you only get that by investing in your people as people.
I love that. And it's kind of given me like personal mission vibes. Like we've got to give people permission to have their personal professional missions, and like
Yep.
where they're working is helping them develop that instead of just clocking in, doing the job, maybe not the full way, just kind of going through the motions versus like being on a team that has a shared vision and a shared mission. So it's kind of cool to see you bringing the, technical, I guess, investments and then having that balanced out with the influential and people-oriented investments, because what's it worth if you have all of this cool tech if you can't get people to buy in? Um, my third question kind of centers around that. A few months ago, someone in our profession, Melanie Ensign, wrote this awesome article called "When Your Cybersecurity or Privacy Career Breaks Your Heart," and it was really about leaders who there's like a misalignment between what they're doing professionally, what they're trying to achieve, versus what the organization is willing to invest in or actively disinvesting in. So I'm kind of curious, how you would, what type of advice you would give to a professional who feels more like a cleanup crew, or to your earlier point, just like the help desk people or whatever, on how to overcome that, and what you would suggest.
I'll answer sort of that in two parts. So one is there's a very, I'll say, dangerous, what I call leadership drain that's happening, and I imagine it's happening in privacy, but I certainly see that happening in cybersecurity, where the best leaders, and I truly mean that by the leaders, they're being choked out in corporate, right? They are not set up to succeed, and I've seen that. I mean, arguably even for myself, I left corporate because I could no longer tolerate that, and that was 10 years ago, right? And so many of my close CISO friends, people who I look up to as being amazing leaders, more and more of them are leaving the field, doing consultant, doing advisory. Some of them have left security entirely. I know a top CISO who left because he could no longer deal with the stress, and now he does long haul truck driving. And he says, "I'm happier than I've ever been." Right. So we're having a leadership drain, and we've seen that happen in other fields as well, notably in the political field, where being a politician used to be a very noble profession. I think very few of us would argue that that's a noble profession nowadays, and we're seeing that happening in cyber, right, where the top leaders are leaving. And when you have the top leaders leave, you're left with suboptimal leadership. If you're left with suboptimal leadership, that's going to have a ripple effect down, right? We're going to have suboptimal cyber outcomes, right? And so I think that's extremely dangerous, like I said, especially in this very interconnected digital era that we live in. If we are left, if the best leaders are leaving and they're choosing not to be in that position, that doesn't bode well for the future, right? And so I'm it's very much a worrying trend that I've definitely been seeing, and that's been only getting worse over the past decade. So to directly answer your question, though, in terms of if you're feeling that, what do you do? Um, to me, I go back to, I was talking about the professional buckets of joy, right? Uh, Focus on the things that give you joy. At the end of the day, if you feel like your soul is empty, that's not good, right? That's going to put you on a one-way path to burning out. And I know that because that's why I left corporate. I burned out. And so try and identify whether it's in your current role or maybe a role you could move to, what are the things that give you the greatest professional joy, right? The things that you feel really good about, right? And try and center around that, focus on that, maximize that, right? There's always gonna be stuff in a job that you don't like, but it needs to be offset. So at the end of every day, you still feel something inside, and that's very much, like I said, the case for me, that I focus around those professional joys. That way I'm able to have, like I said, those really great conversations, those great relationships, and I feel really good about the work that I do. And I can honestly say that after 20 years, cyber doesn't fill my soul, right? I don't feel soulful about it. I don't. But I offset that with the coaching. I offset that with the speaking, right? That fills my soul, right? I offset that by building great friendships, right? That's the stuff that I love, and it helps me feel good at the end of the day, right? So that's what I would tell people. If you're feeling that, center around again. What is it that brings you joy?
I love to hear that like cybersecurity is kind of the vehicle for you to do the things that you enjoy, which is the coaching and the speaking. Kind of related. So if you can find a bucket of joy item, but you kind of have to balance it out with the things that you're just like, I have to do this. We're all juggling these hats in our profession. Where just work is just not going to stop. We actually started this before we started recording, and it's just like there's a lot of work to do. Constantly got things in the air. I know you're working on something to help people with this sort of like burnout or overcapacity, wearing multiple hats. Can you tell us about this new program you've got going with Judy?
Yeah, yeah. So Judy Selby was, if you're not following her on LinkedIn, you have to follow her. She's probably one of the top cyber lawyers in America, if not in the world. One of my favorite people, and one of the things that she and I are working on. So it's a show slash mini series slash still TBD, but some content around what we refer to as stacked hats. She and I both have an affinity for wearing hats. I love wearing baseball hats, and this is a minor league baseball hat from the state of Indiana. So I love wearing, like I said, random baseball hats, as does she. And we marry that with the fact that in our daily lives, we're wearing multiple hats, right? We're stacking these hats. So we're rooting this around leadership, around staying grounded, around staying motivated and staying soulful. So look out for that type of content, which is going to be hopefully coming out sometime in early July or late June. Like I said, it's meant to be pragmatic. It's meant to be soulful. It's meant, like I said, to help people get through recognizing, hey, you're going to wear multiple hats. That's okay. Celebrate each and every hat, because each and every hat does have a story. But also recognizing, like I said, how you can take ownership of that and take control of your own narrative.
I love it. I can't wait to see that show. Okay, I have one last question before we open it up to the audience. And it's about leadership. So I read a post you wrote recently about not letting your bias prevent you from making a good business decision about promoting a colleague. And I was wondering if you have any other sort of thematic leadership advice that you're seeing amongst your clients that you can share with the group watching today.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Mary. And you know what? It goes back to, like I said, I'm a big believer in what I've referred to as connected leadership. Right? Connected leadership is the sort of the term of leadership that I'm choosing to embrace right now. Things I'm telling my clients and using in my talks. We live in extremely divisive times. We live in extremely disconnected times, unfortunately, and very polarized times. And more than anything, leaders need to be able to be deeply connected. They need to be deeply connected in terms of who they are, right? So you need to be connected inwardly, and to be successful as a leader, they need to be deeply connected outwardly to those that they have the privilege of leading, right? And you can only develop that type of deep visceral connections through being deeply human. Right? As I mentioned earlier, to me, leadership starts with very deep human traits of kindness, empathy, authenticity, and vulnerability. Right? If you harness that, if you focus on that and developing those skills, that allows you to be very successful as a connected leader. Right? And doing so will elevate you beyond, like I said, a lot of the traditional bias thinking that has held many people back in IT and cyber, I imagine privacy as well, over the past two plus decades. Right? And very quickly, I appreciate you mentioning that post. That post really focused around someone that when I was a fractional CISO for a client, I was focusing on identifying who could be the first hire of their internal security team. And I found someone who's extremely passionate. She was a junior IT analyst. And I thought she was the perfect fit. Right? And the IT infrastructure manager to whom this role would report, he said no. Right? He kept saying no. And I said, why? And he kept giving me really crappy answers, to the point where I went to the CIO and I said, look, this is who you're going to hire as a security analyst. And she said, well, we're paying you more than we're paying the infrastructure manager. Might as well take your advice. So they went with it, and she absolutely flourished. Right. And that post, the story that I was sharing there, was that I caught up with her after about 10 years. And, she was telling me how she's happier than she's ever been in a role she never thought she would have. She makes more money than she thought she ever would. She gets more vacation than she thought she ever would. And she said it was all because you took a chance on me. And I said, I completely disagree. I said, taking a chance would imply that there was doubt in my mind. There was no doubt in my mind, right, that you would succeed, right? I simply chose to let my kindness overrule my internal bias, right? And that's why I think great leaders in this day and age need to start with being kind. That's how you're going to optimize your leadership decision making.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that incredible story. And we can also link to that post. It was very great to see a leader like you sticking up for people with diverse skill sets. So thank you for that. Let's go ahead and turn off the recording. So thanks for the folks who are tuning in.